All right. Well, I think we might be live. How exciting. Welcome, everybody, as you're all coming in to this chat with Sara Foster about her amazing new novel, The Hush. I will introduce myself quickly. I'm Anna Valdinger. I'm a publisher at HarperCollins, and it is my great privilege to be the publisher of The Hush, which I just love. And I'm so excited to be talking to you today about it. It's one of the books I have been the most excited about this year. And I just can't tell you how thrilling it is finally to see it hitting shelves and see that readers can get their hands on it, because I just think it's such a wonderful story. This is your 7th novel, but it's your first with HarperCollins and with me. So I thought today we can chat a bit about the book itself, your writing process a bit, and perhaps pull the veil back on the publishing world for people, if anyone's interested. But I do want to say I have obviously heaps of questions for you, but we are most interested in hearing from you guys watching, the lovely and very smart Better Reading community. So please do put all of your questions into the chat and I will be keeping a sharp eye on it. So just sing out if you have anything to ask Sara or me. But to start us off, while everyone's settling in, The Hush, Sara, marks a slightly new direction for you as a writer. It's still got all of your trademarks, amazing characters, intriguing suspense, all that page-turning tension that you're so good at. But could you tell us a bit about the book, I guess, to start us off?
Yes, absolutely. Hi, everyone at Better Reading. It's an absolute pleasure to be talking to you live. Hi, Jessie, and hi, Jill, who've already come and said hello. So The Hush is a little bit different for me because it's set in the very near future. It's set in the UK at a time when there have been an increasing number of unexplained stillbirths going on across the country. And in response to this and the fact that pregnant teenage girls are going missing, the government have decided to clamp down on people's freedoms and also increase their powers of surveillance across the entire population. So I've kind of done a lot more world building in this story than I've ever done before. But the difference is that that's the difference. But the similarity to all my other books is that I still have this very centered, strong female leads in there. So in The Hush, it's this mother-daughter team called Emma and Lainey. So Emma is a midwife at the local hospital in the town where they live, which is called Whitehaven. And she's desperately trying to help the women who need her. Meanwhile, Lainey is her daughter and she's a student at the local high school, and her friend Ellis is one of the missing girls. So as these two go along, they begin to realize just how personally they are caught up in this situation. And once they realize how much danger they're in, they have to turn to the community of women around them for help. But this is an amazing community that they've got. And these women are determined not only to get Lainey and Emma to some kind of safety, but also to discover the truth of what's actually going on around them.
Yeah, and it's so gripping. I should also say hi to Debbie, who has chimed in. I want to talk a bit about the characters because, Emma and Lainey are really, and the kind of wider cast of characters, I think are really at the heart, as you say, of the novel. There's a lot of big picture stuff going on in the background. But Emma and Lainey, it still feels like a very intimate story about these two women. How do you go about creating a voice, I guess, for each of them so that they each feel very distinct from each other and yet the book feels like a coherent whole?
Yeah, so Emma really came to me first in this kind of context. I think that I was looking at kind of mothers in fiction and how they'd been missing in a lot of this kind of dystopian fiction with young adult heroines. And I wanted to try and reintroduce the mother figure. So a lot of because I actually studied for my PhD as part of doing this book as well. And I'm writing theoretical side of things. So part of that study was wanting to look at what happens when you reintroduce a different kind of mother in the fiction. Because what we find in dystopian fiction is a lot of absent mothers that are very disempowered. Sometimes they are dead. Sometimes they are just kind of depressed or off to the side or vanished somehow, but you very rarely see a present mother. So I really started by examining what kind of mother I wanted to look at and introduce. And Emma's very different because she works as a midwife. She's right on the cusp of motherhood for everybody else as well as herself. And she's this very quiet rebel. So when she goes into the hospital and the women need her, and they often need care that they're not really getting from the hospital and the kind of strict authoritarian rules that are going on there right now, she looks for little ways that she can push against that, but she does it very quietly. And I think although there are lots of differences between Emma and Lainey, because as Emma is the mother, she is more resigned to the society around her and kind of a little bit quiet about the way she goes about pushing back. You can see elements of her and Lainey as well, the daughter, who is not at all resigned to the way things are going in the world. And along with her feisty friend Serena, wants to push back quite overtly. So they attend this protest at one stage. So I think it's just examining those different generations and how no one's happy with the situation, but because of life experience or because of their perspectives, they're trying to push back in different ways.
I think that's so true. And I mean, I do think it's such a fascinating period to kind of jump into that mother-daughter relationship, those difficult teenage years that can often be quite fractured, I think, between mothers and daughters. But I think what you've created with them is quite a wonderful relationship where it's supportive and it's quite honest, but it's not necessarily uncomplicated or easy at each time, or at various moments. I wonder if you could talk a bit about the ways that Emma tries to mother or does mother Lainey, in a way to sort of give her freedom, but also support her.
Yeah, well, the theory that I've looked at while I've been doing this has been really interesting because actually some theorists talk about this lie of separation, as they call it, where they say that actually it's quite a cultural construction that mothers are expected to step back from their daughters. And it's actually serving potentially a more patriarchal society than we might imagine, whereas we think that's quite a natural thing to do. So there's been some really interesting theory about that as well. I think in the book, what I've tried to do with Emma is there are a few times when authority comes in to try and separate her and Lainey. So that she has an incident at the school, she has an incident with the police, and she has an incident later on in the book. And every time Emma has quite an unusual reaction that we might not be so used to seeing a mother do. In fiction, I say, because I think in real life we probably are used to mothers doing this.
It striking.
Yeah. But Emma pushes back. So she always sides somehow with her daughter rather than with what the authorities are trying to do. And she recognizes that if she sides with the authorities, they're essentially putting that wedge in between her and her child. And she wants to push back against that very much.
I think it's absolutely brilliant. We do have a question from Jessie Joseph asking, how do you come up with your book titles? Now, I find titles so hard, and you've had to come up with 7.
Yes.
Where do they come from?
Oh, well, sometimes they come really early on in the story and they're just there all the time. And then every now and again, I'm searching for one. I mean, we've had a very interesting journey, haven't we, Anna, with this title, because it originally was called The Doll Babies. And we didn't like the fact that necessarily the doll babies were the focus of the book. We wanted to look at how we could incorporate the more female-centered and empowered themes in the title.
Well, I thought it was such a striking title as well. It was such a memorable one. So it was, I was torn about it.
It was hard, wasn't it? But I think we went back and forth, didn't we? And eventually we just hit on, we were talking about lullabies and all sorts of things, weren't we? And Hush Baby and all this kind of thing. And then we just hit on the hush. And I think you get that moment, don't you, Anna, when there's a little shiver down your spine, you go, think we have something here. So in this case, it was very much a debated title. That hasn't always been the case.
Yeah, we've got somewhere on my files, I've got this massively long list of all the various ones that we pinged back and forth to each other. But you're right, it did feel like the one when it came along.
Yeah, absolutely.
So it can be a thorny one. And so speaking of the doll babies, I want to kind of touch on the backdrop that you've kind of set the book against, of this epidemic of stillbirths. I mean, it's a very difficult topic. It's not something that's often talked about. And I wanted to ask kind of how you came to that subject. I think you handle it with tremendous sensitivity. You manage to walk that line where it's the heartbreak is absolutely acknowledged and present, but it never slips into a kind of prurient or sort of where it's too much, or you're like lingering on the page with it. You manage to kind of keep it to a point. So yeah, I was interested where that idea came from and how you approached it.
Yeah, so for quite a long time when I was doing these studies, and I started obviously with the concept of this missing mother, I knew there was something bigger going on in the world, in the background, and I didn't figure out what it was for a couple of years probably. And it was quite a nervous time because I was thinking, oh, there's just a missing link here that I haven't got. And then one day I was walking around the house and it suddenly came to me in a bit of a flash of inspiration. And again, it was so confronting that I was in a daze for the rest of the day thinking, I think that's it, but it is so awful. I don't know how I'm going to write about it. And yet I knew that for this book, it was what I wanted to write about, because I wanted to write about the female experience and about questions that we do find and situations that we do find hard to talk about. And but we also sometimes really want to talk about or need to talk about, but it needs to be done in very sensitive ways, obviously, when you're dealing with these kinds of topics. So what I wanted to make sure when I actually wrote the book was that is the surrounding world to the story, but we are very careful in how we move in and out of those scenes. There is very little actually focused in hospitals on those scenes. It's more about how the women and the mothers are reacting to this kind of pressure. And also something so awful is happening to these women. And yet from the outside, the authority is just piling more and more pressures on. So it starts that you have to go into a chemist to take a pregnancy test, and you can't leave the chemist. You have to do it there. They get the results, they record them, so they know everyone who's pregnant. And then the laws get worse and worse from there. And I felt so strongly that, this would be the most unimaginable, worst thing that I could possibly think of. And yet, if we didn't have a sympathetic government or authority in charge and something like that happened, you could very easily see it drifting down that road. So then that's the starting point. And the thing that kept me going with writing about some of these difficult themes, and particularly when COVID came along and added a whole new dimension, and I was really going, how am I going to continue, writing this book that is, quite dark in its surrounding material, was the fact that ultimately I'm writing a story about female resistance, female fight back, female friendship, and female empowerment. And these women are looking and saying, oh no, we are not sitting in this place anymore. What are we going to do about this? In some really kind of different kind of ways. So some of it's hard and heavy, but there are moments of real lightness, real connection, real humor, that they bring to the table, this core group of women. And because I was writing about that as the heart of the story, that's why I was able to push on.
I do think you're right. I think that they come across as real people, and real life is never just one kind of note. And so I feel like you get a sense of the joyousness of the friendship between Serena and Lainey, for example, and also the friendship that Emma has with her work colleagues and her good friends. And although they have slightly different flavors, of course, because there's a different generational aspect to it, I think that there is levity and hope in the end.
Can I interject a minute?
Oh yeah, please.
And just say, in this book, you're going to, as part of that, you're going to meet the very formidable matriarch almost of the story called Geraldine Fox. And when you were talking about them feeling like real people, Geraldine is this real feminist icon. She's actually left her family behind to kind of forge a career as an academic and a very outspoken feminist. Done a great job of that, although it has cost her in other ways, as you will find out. But Geraldine was actually going to be told from the first person, she was going to be much more part of the story originally, because I wanted to connect all the different generations. So I wanted daughter, mother, grandmother. But then I realized that all of her things were interrupting the story as I went along, and I had to hold her back. And then it became very clear it was Lainey and Emma's story to tell in the narrative, but Geraldine was going to come in later on. When she did come in, she seemed to be so fed up of waiting that she just delivered this kind of 20-page manifesto of all her ideas, and I felt like she was just channeling through me, and I was typing away going, oh my god, there's no way we can put all this in the book.
I had no idea. Oh, that's so interesting. You know, by the time it even comes to me, you know, you've done obviously so much work. I do actually think that Geraldine's a really fascinating character to bring in, because she and characters like Serena have quite an outspoken and fierce strength. And Emma and Lainey, like you say, there's a slightly more quiet rebellion. Was it a very intentional choice to explore these different ways that women can use their voices and be strong? You know?
Yeah, I think that I wanted to really represent different aspects of different female characters, different perspectives on womanhood, without everyone does have conflicting views in the novel, but they also have respect, so that those views never kind of cause them to have a massive fallout, not the core group of women anyway. And I think I also really wanted to show that strength doesn't always mean loudness, because we're very used to, in this loud world now, the loudest people get the attention, and, you know, kind of it feels like that anyway. And it feels like you have to be loud to be noticed or to have something to say. Whereas, you know, I really admire, there are many people in my life, many women in my life, who go about doing things in quite a silent, kind of reserved, but very forceful way. You know, I kind of admire so many women who are doing all sorts of different occupations, and they're not necessarily loud, but they have an inner strength all the time. And yeah, I think that's one of the great things you notice about women. They go through a lot, and they have this inner core of strength that doesn't always have to be laid out on the table like Geraldine would.
It doesn't have to be all caps. Yeah. I know. It's so true. It's really interesting. Melissa Watson says, hi, and your new book sounds so interesting, and I can tell you that it is. And Jill Wright, it's so good. I know, I feel evangelical about this book, I must say. Jill Wright is asking, have you got another novel in the pipeline? Which is a touch impatient, Jill. Read this one.
I like it though.
I mean, I'm impatient too, to be fair.
Yes, Jill, I definitely have. I've got a few different ideas that are percolating at the moment. So some are more traditional psychological suspense. Sometimes I'm never quite sure whether I finish with the Hush women either. So down the line, you never know. They might reappear, but certainly plenty to do.
Oh, that's very exciting. And actually that leads us quite neatly on to some of the more kind of publishing elements that I think, you know, obviously chime in the comments if you're like, no, we just want to talk about the book. But I was interested because, you know, because this is a slightly new direction for you, you decided that you wanted a new publisher for this, and that's how you ended up coming to me. But it was a pretty hotly contested bidding war for this book. And so I think people might be interested to know, how do you go about in that situation making that decision?
Yeah, it's challenging, definitely, to go through that process, and especially when people have different takes on the book and you're not quite sure which direction to go in. I know some people seemed, you know, quite genuinely concerned that, you know, I might be going off in a different direction and it wouldn't perhaps lose some of the psychological suspense audience. But I feel confident that there is enough in this that you will recognize my writing very strongly to go with a different background, and that I've always written strong female characters, so you'll still see a lot of me in there that's always been in there. Really, how I made my decision, Anna, was because you came in and got it. Like,
oh, I wanted it.
You just knew the book straight away. I could tell by the way that you, and, you know, kind of, there were other people as well who, you know, really loved this book, but I felt like you charged in and you were very passionate. And you know that you need that passion behind the story that you're telling when you're going to publish it and work as a team. So really, it's just looking for those people that you think, yeah, that they seem like they really understand where I'm trying to go with this as well.
Well, I mean, I was fierce. I was ready to go round to the other publishers' offices and threaten them because I wanted it so much. I have a great question from Jasmine Aird, who is asking, does the writing process get easier with each book? Which could also lead us on to editorial as well. But do you find it easier?
I wish I could say that it did. I think it varies. Some stories just come to you much more fully formed than others. And I think the more you want to bring out the detail and themes of a story, the harder you really want to keep trying to work. And you know as well that you want each book to get better than the last one. You don't want people to think you're going backwards. So there's more of a challenge there sometimes. However, I think on the other hand, when you've written a few books, you have the confidence that you know ultimately how you can get from start to finish. You become more clued in about what you might look for. You probably become a little bit less possessive as well about the work. So if people are adding in commentary, you can take those critiques and really kind of work in what you want to, but be a bit more confident about what you want to leave out. So I think really that's a double bind. In some ways, yes, in some ways, no.
Well, I'm always interested as well because the writing process is so solitary and, so contained. And then you sell the book. And as much as someone comes in saying, I absolutely love it, it's absolutely brilliant, they are then going to turn around and say, okay, now here's all the stuff that we need to change. And even though you obviously have a very clear vision of it, is that really confronting? Or do you find it, because I know, some authors love the editing process and some find it, a bit of an emotional journey to go on, to kind of have to come at it. How's it for you?
Yeah, it's a challenge for sure. I mean, I think it just depends. Sometimes I remember, for example, in my very first book, there was a prologue that I wrote to it, and I loved this prologue, and it was kind of, I've written something that's really cool. And the first thing the editor did was slash a red line through and go, we don't need that. Yes, that is definitely confronting. However, I do feel as well, I'm a book editor myself. I have a book editing background. And if I wasn't spending all my time writing and raising my children, I would actually love to keep my hands in a bit more at it, just because it gives you another take on reading and books and kind of being able to look at it from another angle. I find it fascinating, and I think it's only improved my writing. So when I come to the editing process, I'm probably not as scared as other people, but it can be quite draining because you have to dig in after a while. And certain books have asked me to do that a lot more than others. But sometimes you edit it and you think you've done your best, and then it sits for a while and we all read it and we go, actually, we need another round of this or that. And you go, whoa, can I get back into that headspace? Because I find it quite intense. And I do find that I have to be, I have to have spells where I can just concentrate on the book and live in the book. I have the kids around a lot. So often I've had to go to hotels or go away for a few days or go to other people's houses or do anything I can really just to get sort of extended time where I can live in the story, because there comes a point where coming in and out of it for an hour or two at a time is actually quite stressful. So, yeah.
And not as productive, I would think, as well.
I think so. I think you can get through a lot more in that kind of period where you give yourself time.
Well, and Karina Kilmore, hi, Karina, has actually asked a very relevant question. She said, what's the hardest thing about writing this book particularly?
So there are a few really hard moments, actually. It's taken sort of 6 years from concept to completion. I've actually written another 2 books in the middle of writing this book and had to leave it for quite a long time to write the books that were under contract. So that was a challenge, and kind of wanting to make sure that it remained fresh in my mind. But it's been such a passion project that I always came back to it. Had quite a lot of personal challenges with kind of ill health of me or people around me and all these kinds of things. So on the outside, that's been going on. And then I think in story wise, it's almost been COVID coming along and all this kind of live kind of current events overtaking us really. So I did say at one stage, I think Kylie Ladd was talking on Twitter about how we're going to frame our novels now. We've got this sort of new world going on and we're all a bit unsteady in it. And I was saying I felt like I was writing near future, and now I feel like I'm writing contemporary fiction, and it's
the future caught up with you.
Strange, to wrap my head around. But obviously, in this fiction, everything is pushed slightly further. It is still very near. It's near future, but very near future, which I think is why people are taking a deep breath, but also loving these women characters and the strength of these women, and realizing that whatever's going on the outside, when you bring it back to the small group of people that you love and you're close to, and you watch how they handle it and they might fight back, it can actually still be a really empowering story. So I've loved doing that.
I do think actually that I could understand if some readers were a bit cautious, thinking, oh God, we've just gone through 2 years of COVID. I cannot face a pandemic novel. And I really want to say that that's not what this reads like. You know what I mean? It's very much the backdrop, but like you say, the women are at the heart, and you end up just joining them on their journey, so it doesn't feel like, a lockdown novel or something like that, which might feel a bit close to the bone. Jill Wright is asking, do you have a regular writing routine? And with your kids around so much, it must be hard to carve that time out.
Yeah, Jill, I wish I did. I do have it doesn't always go to plan, because the best laid plans are often upset by someone needing a doctor's appointment, or, someone needing to go somewhere, or someone being sick. But I do have a framework. So I try to kind of write 800 to 1,000 words a day when I'm in the writing phase. And I try and do that for 4 days a week. And then I know that, I've got something there that I can edit, and then I start progressing it from there. So I don't so much have a writing routine that can happen every day, because life here is a bit too chaotic, but I do have a plan that I adjust as I go along. And I do generally know that 800 to 1,000 words is quite a good length, because you can really get into a scene, but you're not pushing it too far. But you'll be surprised at how quickly that can build up into a novel. And then I push on by going to hotels, or we somehow create space for me to continue doing that.
Well, and that leads actually very neatly on, guys. It's like you've coordinated your questions. You're doing a brilliant job, which I think may have to be our last question, or one more after that. But Jasmine Ed is asking, do you have any advice for aspiring writers?
Yes, I do. I have various things. So often you hear writers say read, and of course that is essential, because the more you immerse yourself in reading, the more helpful it can be. However, I would sort of take that on a little bit and say, if you are, whatever you're writing, find a book that you can call your kind of touchstone book, the book you want to come back to, the book that you really admire, and break it right down. Like, look at exactly how they did it. Look at from everything to sentence structure, the word choices they use, you don't need to read a wealth of material. Sometimes when we say read, you sort of imagine people just grabbing books left, right, and center. I don't get as much time as I want to read. I wish I had more time to read. There's piles of books that I would love to read.
So true.
But I come back to that, okay, who has done this really well? So in this book, for example, there was a book by a lady called Meg Ellison, who wrote a book called The Book of the Unnamed Midwife. And I loved the way that she presented her female character. I loved the way that she told her narrative, and she zoomed in and out. And every time I would go, what am I trying to achieve? I could just take that one book that I loved and analyze it and go, how did she do this to me? And I find that really valuable, and hopefully condenses the sort of feeling of everything you've got to achieve before you can even write.
I think that's really good advice, actually. Even things like, where do you start a scene? Do you start a scene as someone enters the house and walking in, or do you start it mid-conversation? And when do you cut it off? And how are they managing to get across exposition without, long stretches of just telling the reader, what sort of happened in the past and what the backstory is and stuff. So I think that analyzing writing is fantastic advice.
Absolutely.
For aspiring writers. And to wrap ourselves up, we have a great question from Kelly Frame. Sorry, Kelly. Asking, do you get to know the characters as the book goes along, or do you begin with a good sense of them?
Thanks so much for your question, Kelly. I should tell you guys a little special story about Kelly as well, because a couple of years ago, Kelly was kind enough to bid on the auction for Fieries auction that I had, and the winning prize was to get names in the book. So Kelly and a few of her friends have got their names in the book. And this is our Kelly. So hi Kelly, this is great that you're here. And so with the characters, I like to let them sit for a little while. I like to let them sit for as long as possible actually in my head. And I see if they continue chatting to me, because sometimes you'll have a really great idea for a character, but they won't keep talking to you. And I find that the ones I really want to write about are the ones that are constantly in your head. Geraldine from The Hush is still in my head now, telling me she's got more to
shouting
say.
at you.
Geraldine won't shut up. But most of the time, yeah, they just sit nicely in the background and they continue talking to me. When I start building them, of course, I do begin asking more questions about them, analyzing them a bit more. But I keep a lot of it in my head to begin with and just see who develops, because I know that if I love the story and it's hanging on to me, it's something that would be great to write.
It will actually work on the page. Well, I just want to say a huge thank you to you, Sarah, to all of you guys who are watching and asking great questions. I'm going to give a quick shout out to Kerry Stewart, who's a retired bookseller and buyer. We love booksellers, such a wonderful group of people, and we love readers. Without you guys, we wouldn't be able to do what we do. I encourage all of you to pick up a copy of The Hush. You can buy it. There's a link there through Better Reading. It's available there. It's available everywhere. Tell your friends. It is, I hope, as you've got a sense from our chat today, such a good book for book clubs. There's so much in there to chat about. And we've got a few book club questions at the back of the book as well, just if you want a little bit of prompting. And if you didn't ask any questions or you think of questions afterwards, please do follow Sarah on socials and let her know what your questions are, because, you know, I know you love hearing from readers.
Absolutely, yeah. So if you want to follow me on Facebook, it's Sara Foster Author is the tag. And I'm on Instagram as well at Sara Foster Author. Remember, Sarah without the H. And I'm hoping to also do another compilation of answering people's questions in a couple of weeks' time. So I'll definitely be looking for questions in the chat. And yeah, I'll be back online on those sites in a little while.
And particularly once you've read the book, I just think that there is so much buzzing around your head that is, you know, really fun to sink your teeth into and chat about. So a huge thank you to everybody for coming along, and thank you, Better Reading, and thank you, Sarah. That was tremendous fun. I don't really want to say goodbye, but we should probably let everyone get back to work.
Thanks, everybody.
So, here's The Hush. Everyone go buy it.